You know both President Bushes.
Yes.
Have you ever met any, besides President Obama, have you met other presidents? President Clinton, President Reagan?
You know, I haven't. I haven't met President Clinton. I saw Ronald Reagan speak at the 1992 convention, but I never met him. That was one of my great regrets. I would have loved to have met Reagan.
So obviously being a senator is a qualification for president. You've done other things in public life. Talk about anything from before you ran for elective office that kind of you feel helped prepare you in terms of experience or temperament to be president.
Well, before I was in the Senate, I was the Solicitor General of Texas, which is the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And that is an executive position that I held 5.5 years. And during that time, over and over again, we led the nation fighting to defend conservative principles and winning on a national level. So we defended the Ten Commandments monument that's on the state capitol grounds. We went to the U.S. Supreme Court, won 5-4. We defended the Pledge of Allegiance, the words "one nation under God," went to the Supreme Court, won unanimously. We defended the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, went to the Supreme Court, won 5-4.
And all that prepared you to be president. How?
Because it was walking the walk and defending conservative principles. I think the central issue in the Republican primary is trust. Who can you trust? You know, the problem that we see all the time are what I call campaign conservatives, which is candidates who on the campaign trail say they're terribly conservative and yet they get elected and they don't follow their campaign promises. Every one of us should ask any candidate who shows up in front of you, you say you believe these principles. Show me. When have you stood up and fought for them? When have you bled for them? And what have you accomplished? As the scripture says, you shall know them by their fruits.
Leave aside President Reagan for a moment. Just tell me other presidents and traits they had that if you were president, you'd like to emulate or try to match.
Well, you obviously started with where I would go first, which was Reagan, and he was my hero. Look, there are many other presidents who are admirable. Certainly Abraham Lincoln.
Just what about Lincoln is
Lincoln
what?
Endured enormous pressure as the country was ripped apart, and he had a steadfastness and a peace and clarity and consistency and moral vision. I'll give you another example of a president, George W. Bush. George W. Bush, when he stood on that pile of rubble after 9/11 and told the grieving people across this country that I hear you, and the terrorists who knocked down these buildings are going to hear you soon. That was a moment where every one of us...
What was the trait or traits you think he showed there that you'd like to have as president?
Strength, clarity. He inspired every American. That touched our souls. He stood strong when America was under attack. That's a president's first responsibility.
In the wake of Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm wondering where you think the country is, not where Ted Cruz is, but where is the country on the use of American military force overseas now?
Well, you know, I think often in foreign policy it gets framed as a binary choice. You're either a hawk and want to invade everybody, or a dove and are terrified to use military force. I think most Americans are at a place in between. You know, I have described my foreign policy views as a third point on the triangle, very much along the lines of Ronald Reagan, that I think, number one, the president should be a clarion voice for freedom, that the bully pulpit of the presidency is powerful. I think if and when military force is required, it should follow three principles. Number one, it should always, always, always be directly connected to vital U.S. national security interests. That's the touchstone.
What's an example of that from the last 20 years?
Well, let me finish the principles and then I'll come right back to that. Number two, we should use overwhelming force. And number three, we should get the heck out. It's not the job of our military to transform foreign countries into democratic utopias. It is the job to hunt down and kill our enemies before they murder innocent Americans.
So what's a military action by the U.S. in the last 20 years that meets all three of those?
So let me give you two examples that are both from recent history that illustrate where I wouldn't and where I would consider the use of military force. Where I wouldn't is Syria. Now listen, Bashar Assad is a monster who's murdered hundreds of thousands of his own citizens, women and children, and yet the enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend. At the time, 2 years ago, the question I kept asking the administration was, okay, if the military attack is successful and you topple Assad, and the chemical weapons fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda or Al-Nusra or ISIS, how does that make us any safer? Radical Islamic terrorists who would use them against Americans, against Europeans, against Israelis. The administration had no coherent answer to that, so I opposed direct military force there. Now let me give you another example. Iran. I think the single greatest threat that this country faces today is the threat of a nuclear Iran. I think the Obama nuclear deal is a catastrophic mistake. It is my hope that Congress in the next 60 days stands up and stops it. That's going to depend on Democrats deciding they're willing to put national security and the lives and safety of millions of Americans above partisan loyalty to the Obama White House.
But there's no recent, last 20 years, there's no military action you would say that met the three-part Cruz test?
Look, there's no doubt going into Afghanistan after 9/11, after the Taliban was justified.
But that won't meet the Cruz test
it was
still
focused.
there.
Well, that's a fair, but you asked the initial military action.
Well,
I think.
I'm saying, is there any military action from start to finish that meets the three-part Cruz test in the last 20 years?
I would say, there haven't been that many military actions in the last 20 years. But I will say this, winning the Cold War, and this is where Reagan understood peace through strength.
I want to just quickly get in one other topic here and then we'll be done, which is what Mr. Trump said about Senator McCain's service. Do you have any problem with that?
Well, I'll tell you what I think of John McCain. John McCain is a friend of mine. He is an extraordinary American hero. I'm proud to serve with John McCain.
So you feel so strongly about that, as do your other colleagues running for president. Senator Rubio called what Donald Trump said offensive ranting. Your former governor, Rick Perry, said he should get out of the race. He's not qualified. Again, I'm not asking you to repudiate Donald Trump as a person. I don't think you're as good friends with him as some of the other people in the race who have been critical here. So I'm trying to understand what separates you from the others who have been, who feel this is sort of beyond the pale, what Donald Trump said.
Listen, I will happily tell you what I think about John McCain. I'll happily tell you my views on any issue. You want to talk immigration or Obamacare? I'm not going to engage in the media's game of bashing another Republican candidate. I'm just not going to do it.
Some people say the reason you're not doing it, and you haven't been critical of his previous comments, is because you want to make sure that if he does get out of the race, you're able to win the supporters that he has now. Is this a political calculation?
I am not going to go into the gutter with personal attacks and impugning character. Now, let me be clear. I do think policy distinctions are fair game. So I will talk about differences, whether it is on amnesty or Common Core, or religious liberty or marriage or life or any other issue. That's what's supposed to be the bread and butter of politics, but I'm not going to engage in personal attacks impugning anyone else's character.
It's a matter for you of both the kind of politics you want to practice as well as friendship and loyalty? Is that
my view on John McCain is explicit and unambiguous. He's an American hero and he's a friend. I'm not going to just take a stick to fellow Republicans, or for that matter, to Democrats. In my time in the Senate, I haven't impugned the character of Republicans or Democrats. I don't intend to start today.
Right, okay. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.